I pay homage to the Blessed One, Supremely Enlightened Buddha. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I pay homage to my teacher, Lukuswami Namaste. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So, dear Dhamma friends, if you can remember, we were learning this discourse from the Majjhima Nikaya, Uddesavibhaṅgasutta, and we already discussed and learnt about how to investigate and how to examine so that the practitioner's consciousness is neither scattered and diffused externally. We learnt about that, and how it is not stuck internally. Do you remember how the consciousness stuck internally? Kathan so ajhatang santittanti uchati, the Supreme Buddha teaches. If somebody attains the first jhana, right, and which is secluded from sense pleasures, secluded from unskillful qualities, and enters and remains in the first jhana, which has the rapture and bliss born of seclusion, right? Vivekajang piti sukha, while placing the mind and keeping it connected. And then what happens? His or her consciousness follows after that rapture and bliss born of seclusion, right? Vivekaja piti sukhanusari viññānaṁ hoti. So now, instead of following the rupa nimitta anusari, instead of following the signs and features of the visual objects, right? Signs and features of sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles, during meditation, the meditator's consciousness follows after some meditators, okay? We are going to learn about the difference. But here, Buddha teaches, in this case, his or her consciousness follows after the rapture and bliss born of seclusion. And that consciousness is tied, attached, and fettered to the gratification in that rapture and bliss born of seclusion, right? So it's kind of holding on to that happiness, that joy born of that jhana, because it's kind of extraordinary experience for anyone apart from these, ordinary, the worldly pleasures. Somebody maybe for the first time experiences the spiritual happiness, right? So if that person doesn't have a thorough knowledge about the vipassana, about the true nature of this jhana, and about the goal that we need to strive for, then possibly the practitioner's consciousness will get attached to that happiness. So that is kind of an obstacle for the improvement of the path. That is why it is said the mind is said to be stuck internally, so it's not improving, right? So in the same way it happens with the second jhana. What happens in the second jhana? What does the consciousness follow? At that time, consciousness follows after the rapture and bliss born of samadhi, born of concentration. That's the samadhi jampiti sukhanusari viññānaṁ hoti. In the third jhana, see now how consciousness let go of different mental states. Now it lets go of joy, rapture, and joy born of seclusion. And now it gets attached to something else. It gets attached to this rapture and bliss born of samadhi. And then consciousness leaves that and holds on to something else in the third jhana. What is the third jhana? With the fading away of rapture, he or she enters and remains in the third jhana, where they meditate with equanimity, mindful and aware, personally experiencing the bliss of which the noble ones declare, equanimous and mindful, one meditates in bliss. So that's the nature of the description of the third jhana by the Buddha. And so then This time the consciousness follows after the equanimity. Right? So, upekkanusari vijnana hoti. And the consciousness is tied and attached and fitted to the gratification in that equanimous bliss. Okay? So then consciousness leaves that and holds on to something else in the fourth jhana. So now gradually the meditator attains higher levels of concentration. So what is the fourth jhana? Giving up pleasure and pain and ending former happiness and sadness. He enters and remains in the fourth jhana without pleasure or pain, with pure equanimity and mindfulness. So that is the description of the fourth jhana. Fourth jhana is a very advanced mental absorption. Fourth jhana is basically used by those meditators, the arahants, before they attain arahantship. This fourth jhana is used to gain the knowledge of past lives. They direct their mind to get that knowledge when they are in the fourth jhana, because this fourth jhana is said to be very strong, sharp, and it's a very kind of still absorption. Mind is very stable, and the meditator can stay in that jhana for a long time. So it is not bothered by any other wandering thoughts or hindrances. So it's a very powerful jhana. And then the meditators use that jhana to gain the knowledge of karma, how the karma works, how beings are born according to their karma, and the different places the karma can take beings, and how they experience pain and pleasure in those worlds, and how they die according to the karma. So that special knowledge called Chutupapata jnana is gained with the help of the fourth jhana. And finally, when they try to develop vipassana knowledge within the fourth jhana, and they develop the understanding about the cause and effect mechanism, paticca samuppada, and they understand the Four Noble Truths within the fourth jhana, they develop vipassana, they contemplate on the impermanence, suffering, and non-self of the five aggregates of clinging, six sense bases, and they attain this realization called the destruction of taints. Destruction of the taints of sensuality, taints of existence, and taints of ignorance. So all these three taints are abandoned at that stage, and which is the knowledge of the realization of Nibbana. So all those amazing things happen when the meditator is in the fourth jhana. Okay, and but that's the most of the arahants, like we can say, that's the general kind of standard path. But Buddha also has mentioned that attaining the destruction of the taints, attaining Nibbana, is also possible within the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, and so on. So, but the fourth jhana is specifically explained in the suttas. After attaining the fourth jhana, they use it for gaining the knowledge of the past lives and knowledge of karma, and finally the knowledge of the destruction of the taints. Okay, so in this case, the consciousness follows after that neutral feeling, tied, attached, and fettered to gratification in that neutral feeling. Tassa dukkama sukhanusare vijnana hoti. Now consciousness falls onto something else, right? So this is called the consciousness stuck internally. Consciousness is stuck internally. So there are other suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya, and Buddha teaches, because of this clinging and the consciousness is fettered to this gratification of these different feelings of jhanas, these meditators are born in the Brahma world, and they sometimes stay there for eons and eons, for a long time. And so today we are going to learn about this. Katanchao so ajhatang asantitang uchati. Right? So this is what Buddha wanted to explain in that the summary. This is something that was highlighted by the Buddha. This is what the meditators need to achieve, not the previous thing. Because the previous thing is about the consciousness is stuck internally, right? That was not encouraged by the Buddha. This is encouraged by the Buddha. Consciousness is not stuck internally. And how does that happen? Again, when that meditator is in the first jhana, which has rapture and bliss born of seclusion, their consciousness does not follow after that rapture and bliss born of seclusion, and is not tied, attached, and fettered to the gratification in that rapture and bliss born of seclusion. Tasanna viveka japiti sukhanusari vinyanam hoti. Na viveka japiti sukhasada gatitang. Right? So this time, the meditator's consciousness is not attached to that pleasure born of meditation, born of seclusion. Why? Because now meditator starts doing vipassana. And Buddha explains how the meditator practices vipassana within the jhana. There are a few different ways of doing it because individuals are different and the way they have practiced in their past lives also different, and there are different categories of people. So one of them is that, I think I read that sutta a few days ago. I think it's Attakanagara Sutta. There's a sutta called Attakanagara Sutta. In that sutta, Arhanta Ananda Thero explains, when that meditator is in the first jhana, the meditator contemplates like this. This first jhana is also conditioned. This first jhana has arisen due to supporting factors. This is volitionally created. Isn't that the true nature of that jhana as well? So then he contemplates this jhana, this meditative absorption is also impermanent. This is subject to change. This is not mine. This is not I am. This is not myself. So he practices vipassana within the jhanas. Does he get attached to that? No. Because he understands this is also subject to change. This is also conditioned. Right? And Buddha asks the practitioners to abandon craving and attachment for all the conditioned things. So that is how his or her mind is said to be not stuck internally. Same thing with the second jhana, right? It's not attached to the gratification of the rapture and bliss born of concentration. And what is the third jhana? He's not attached to the gratification of the equanimous bliss. Okay, and in the fourth jhana, the meditator is not attached to the gratification of the neutral feeling. Okay, so that is how the consciousness is not stuck internally. So the meditator can achieve more advanced things in the path, like the stages of enlightenment. Okay, so yes, the consciousness does not follow after the natural neutral feeling, and is not tied, attached, and fettered to the gratification in that neutral feeling in the fourth jhana. And this is how the consciousness is not stuck internally. Evan ko also ajhatang asantittanti uchati. So Mahakachana Thero, the Arahant Thero, was explaining this after Buddha first introduced this beautiful Dhamma. The monks, remember, monks went to Mahakachana Arahant Thero and asked Thero to elaborate it. So, and then, okay, so far we learned about 4 things. Okay, 4 things. And how did we learn? We learned about how the consciousness is scattered and diffused externally. Then we learned how the consciousness is not scattered and diffused externally. It's 2 things. And then we learned the third one, how the consciousness stuck internally. That's the third one. And then we learned the fourth one, how the consciousness is not stuck internally. Right? So it's kind of deep, right? Really deep, but very clearly explained, right? By the Arahant Mahakachana Thero after learning from the Buddha's teachings. Any questions you like to ask?
When you go into meditation, there is a point where you kind of drop all the sense faculties. And when you're in that state, it's like empty. And then because you can't think of Paticcasamuppada or any of the Vipassana meditation because you're so like you don't feel anything. And then I found that when you come out of that kind of a state, and then all your senses start to come back slowly, and then you can reflect on the Dhamma or the Vipassana and contemplate on it, because there's somehow a state where
no, there shouldn't be during meditation, during any contemplation, there shouldn't be an empty. There shouldn't be an empty kind of.
No thoughts come up. No feelings.
Yeah, but that can happen. But we should not wish for that. We should not go after that. But because we need to contemplate, we have a journey to go, right?
Yeah.
We cannot go. We cannot go anywhere with the emptiness because we have a big work to be done. We need to contemplate on the 3 characteristics of conditioned things. So we have work ahead. So that's why we need to always have that vipassana contemplation with us, because that's the thing that's going to end the sakkaya ditthi and all the other fetters. Yeah, you can see that very clearly in the last part of the breathing meditation when Buddha explains aniccanupassī asasi samiti sikkati. Even in the very subtle stage within the breathing meditation, Buddha teaches when that meditation is taking off well and attains the jhanas, the now meditator starts doing the vipassana within the breathing meditation. Aniccanupassī asasi samiti sikkati. Now the meditator understands the impermanence of breathing and rapture, feelings, jhanas, volitions, and all these different feelings within the jhana produced by mindfulness of breathing. And then virāgānupassī asasi samiti sikkati. Now with advanced practice of vipassana within the breathing meditation, now the meditator can understand how the 5 aggregates of clinging are formed and how this craving arises within the 5 aggregates of clinging. All these subtle aspects are understood, and eventually the craving and attachment, clinging, and all these things are abandoned as a result of both the calming, the samatha aspect of the breathing meditation and the vipassana contemplation. So that's the goal and that's the path.
So you need to have sort of a thinking process in place in order to contemplate.
Yeah, definitely there should be. And even like I was reading these suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya a few days ago, and Venerable Ananda Thero would go to the Supreme Buddha and ask Bhante, is there meditation absorption where The meditator does not perceive earth element, water element, fire element, air element. The meditator does not perceive eye, visual objects, ear, sounds, nose, smells, tongue, tastes, body, tangibles, mind, mental objects. And the meditator does not perceive this world and that world. The meditator does not perceive what is seen, what is heard, what is smelled, what is cognized. But still there is a perception. Is there such a meditative absorption? And then the Blessed One answers, there is, Ananda. And then the Ananda Bhante Thera again asks, what is that? Oh, Blessed One, please teach us, what is that meditative absorption which does not perceive any of those conditioned things, but still there is a perception? And then Buddha explains about the perception in the Arahat Phala Jhana. That's the meditative absorption of the Arahant, the fruit of Arahantship. Buddha explains the meditator does not perceive any of those conditioned things, yet the meditator perceives this specific perception, this specific thing, and Buddha explains about it. Etang santang etang panitang yadidang sabba sankhara samatho sabbu padhi patini saggo tannakayo virago nirodho nibbana. That is the perception of the Arahants within the jhana of fruit of Arahantship. So that is the perception. What is the meaning? This is bliss. This is serene, which is the destruction of all the conditioned things. Sabba sankhara samato, the abandonment of all craving. Tanna kayo nirodho, the cessation of all craving. Virago, the dispassion. Nibbana, that is the perception. So there is a perception, even in the highest, most advanced meditative absorption. And that perception is explained like that. Okay. So we already discussed about 4 topics based on this first part of the explanation of the Blessed One. And now we are at the last topic. So what is the last one? Anupadaya na paritasseya. Okay. So I like to use an alternative translation for this. Use the Bhikkhu Bodhibhante's translation here, and also from my teacher's translation of this sutta from the Sinhala Sutta Pitaka. The summarized Dhamma here, the topic, actually the meditator is not agitated due to the fact of letting go or detachment. Okay, the meditator is not agitated due to the fact that he or she has to be detached from conditioned things, especially from the 5 aggregates of clinging. So before explaining this, Arahant Mahakachana Thero explains the opposite of it. What is the opposite? The opposite is Kathanchavaso Anupada Paritassana hoti. This is the opposite. So this is not the thing that we need. Okay, but Arahant Thero explains the meaning of this first. So that means Paritassana means agitated. Okay, the meditator is agitated. The mind is agitated due to the fact that he or she has to be detached from conditioned things. So when that meditator understands that I have to let go of this, I have to leave this, then the agitation happens. Okay, and now Bhante explains the meaning of it. Okay. Asutava putujjano. There is an unlearned, ordinary person, worldling. Okay. What is the meaning of that person? Ariyanang adassavi. He has not seen the noble ones. He hasn't associated with the Buddha. He hasn't associated with these noble friends. And Arya Dhammas Akovido. And he also hasn't seen the grateful people, and he's not skilled in the teachings of the Buddha. Arya Dhamma means the teachings of the Buddha. Arya Dhamme Avinito, he has not practiced these teachings. Okay, so he hasn't gone for refuge to the triple gem. He doesn't have an understanding about the Four Noble Truths. He doesn't know this true nature of this life and the cycle of life and death. So he only thinks about this life, how to entertain this life, and he doesn't know about precepts. He doesn't know about this world and next world. He doesn't know about karma. Now you understand the ordinary person, the nature. Okay, so this person, rupang attato samanupassati. Because he doesn't have this vipassana knowledge and how things arise and pass away, the only thing he can do is regarding form as self. Form is this physical body. So he regards that as self. This is mine. This is I am. This is myself. Or self as having form, or form in self, or self in form. So he basically is stuck with this idea of self in whatever way he can consider. He cannot think out of the box. He's stuck inside this the wrong notion of self, kind of an ownership. He has this feeling of ownership. I am the owner of this life. I am the owner of this body. Okay, this is the nature of his thinking. Then what happens? Mahakachana Arahantero explains. This is beautiful. Okay, so tassatang rupang viparinamati anyata hoti. But that form of that person decays and perishes. The body gets old, gets sick, right? And the body is dying. Okay, so that is the meaning of viparinamati anyata hoti. Or something happens, some accidents happen, okay? Or cancer, anything, any diseases like that. So this happens to this body. But now what is his feeling? This body is mine. With that feeling, with that conclusion, he thinks this shouldn't happen to me. He doesn't recognize this body, this form is a part of the nature, and this is made up of 4 elements, because he doesn't know anything about these vipassana contemplations. And this is the result of not knowing this. When this changes, his consciousness latches on the perishing of form. Tassa rupa viparinamanyata bhava rupa viparinamanu parivartati vinyanam hoti. Now the consciousness follows that change of the form, and that negative feelings, all the negative feelings born of that sadness, disappointment, and anxiety, because he wished for something else, but now he has to face completely undesirable thing. He has to face, because he thought this is mine, this is who I am, this is myself, and it should be like this. This should not happen to me, like that. Those kind of feelings were there. As a result, because the consciousness latches on that, on the perishing of form. Now, when the form changes, when the body changes, the consciousness now follows that change, and in a very negative way. So that is why this change happens in the body, affects the mind. And now you can remember the teaching, the The body gets sick and the mind gets sick. Remember the Nakula Pitu Sutta? That happens because now the consciousness is affected by that agitation of the mind. Okay, now what happens is that agitation occupies the mind, born of latching onto the perishing of form and originating in accordance with the natural principles. Okay, Tassa Rupa Viparinamanuparivataja Paritassana Dhamma Samuppada Chittang Paryadaya Tittanti. Okay, so now the entire mind is enveloped by these thoughts of fear, agitation, restlessness, sadness, because he is not ready to let go of the body. He's not ready to accept this change, right? Because he was in this strong belief of self. There should be a permanent entity here, and I am the owner of this entity. So because he was like established in that strong notion, now he cannot bear this change. And then the consciousness also follows that all those negative qualities. So he is left with all these dark qualities in the mind. The chittang paryadaya tittanti. Now the mind is enveloped by all those negativities. So he or she becomes frightened, worried, concerned, agitated, right? Because of this inability of letting go. And due to the fact that this person has to let go of that and he's not ready to do that. That is the reason for this agitation. Okay. Chetaso paryadana uttasava cha hoti vighatavacha upekkavacha anupadaya na paritassati. Right? So this person has clung to this, and he doesn't understand the change. So due to the fact that this person has to be detached from it, when he thinks that I have to be detached from this form, this form is leaving me, that is when the agitation happens as a result. Same thing with the feelings. He regards feelings as self in feeling, right? And self is as having feeling or feeling in self, right? So then what happens? The feeling changes and perishes. Because the vipassana knowledge does not come at this stage. This is the place that the vipassana knowledge should come. It's not coming there. So then the consciousness starts playing the major role here. Consciousness latches onto the perishing feeling, changing feeling. Now consciousness starts following that change instead of the vipassana knowledge following it. So agitation occupies the mind, born of latching onto the perishing of feeling, originating in accordance with the natural principles. So this person becomes frightened, worried, concerned, and agitated because this person is not ready to let go of this attachment towards feeling. Okay. What is the feeling? 6 classes of feelings. Feeling born of eye contact, feeling born of ear contact, feeling born of nose contact, feeling born of tongue contact, and feeling born of body contact, and finally feeling born of mind contact. So those are the feelings, 6 classes of feelings. And he doesn't, why does his consciousness follow this change of the feeling? Due to the fact that he's attached to this notion of self, because he doesn't see the feeling as a conditioned thing. Feeling is born of contact. He doesn't see that. He recognizes feeling as mine, I am, and myself. That is the reason. Okay, and same thing happens with the perception. This ordinary person who doesn't have any knowledge about this deep Dhamma, and he experiences perceptions, right? How many perceptions are there? Sanya. How many perceptions? See, there are 6 classes of perception, right? Perception of visual objects, perception of sounds, perception of smells, perception of tastes, perception of tangibles, and perception of mind objects. So how does he regard them? As self, self as having perception, perception in self, or self in perception. And what happens? The perception perishes and changes. Viparinamati anyata hoti. It changes. Why does it change? Because the contact changes, right? When contact changes, the perception changes. You cannot recognize the same person next time, because you always see something that is subject to change. And the ordinary person does not understand it. So ordinary person thinks, this is my house, this is my vehicle, this is my husband, this is my wife, this is my children, this is my grandchildren. So he wants to experience a perception that is not subject to change. When it changes, when that happiness does not come from that imagined perception, then the consciousness follows. That change, that lack of knowledge, the consciousness latches onto the perishing perception, right? And as a result, agitation occupies the mind, born of latching onto the perishing of perception, and then the person becomes frightened, worried, concerned, and agitated because he has to be detached from it and he is not ready to do that. And then sankhara. Same thing happens with the sankhara. There are how many sankharas are there? There are 6 classes of sankhara. Sankhara means the volition. Volition regarding visual objects, volition regarding sounds, volition regarding smells, and volition regarding tastes, volition regarding tangibles, and volition regarding mind objects. So then again, the ordinary person regards volition as self, self as having volition, volition in self, or self in volition. So he's stuck with this wrong notion of self, because he doesn't understand that sankhara, the volition, also arises with the arising of contact, because he hasn't learned it from the teachings of the Buddha. So how can he think that it is conditioned by the contact? The only way he can consider that I am thinking, this is me thinking, right? Thinking it is myself, and like that. So when this sankhara changes, the thoughts changes. Sometimes there are happy thoughts, sometimes there are sad thoughts, but he just wants to hold on to happy thoughts and reject the sad thoughts, and that doesn't work. So when that doesn't work, the consciousness latches onto the perishing, the changing volition, sankhara. As a result, the person becomes frightened, worried, concerned, and agitated due to the fact that he has to detach from it, but he is not ready to do that. Okay. And the same with the consciousness. He regards consciousness as self, self as having consciousness, and consciousness in self, or self in consciousness, right? So what is the consciousness? Again, there are 6 classes of consciousness, as Buddha explains: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. And the only way he can regard this consciousness is as self, because he doesn't know the consciousness is born based on the mentality and materiality, right? When we cognize a visual object, when we cognize a sound, that cognition always backed by the material elements and the mental aspects. So that's the meaning of nama rupa, mentality and materiality. With the arising of mentality and materiality, consciousness arises. That is why we cannot hold on to consciousness. We cannot cognize the same thing as we wish. It always changes. We look at this direction, and one consciousness arises, and then we change the direction. We see something else. So always a different consciousness arises and it changes. But we are not ready to accept that. We are not ready to contemplate the change, because we want to cognize the same thing. We want to cognize the same child who was very little. When the change happens, we are not ready to accept that. We don't see that as the change of these conditioned things, right? We want to cognize the same form, same feeling, right? Same perceptions and all these things. So when that consciousness decays and perishes, the consciousness changes, the consciousness latches onto the changing of consciousness. Isn't that interesting? The consciousness latches onto the changing of consciousness. Very subtle. So as a result, and again, it's not because of using the vipassana knowledge in order to understand the change of the consciousness. So the agitation occupy the mind, born of latching onto the change of the consciousness and originating in accordance with the natural principles. So the person becomes frightened, worried, concerned, and agitated due to the fact that he or she has to be detached from it, and he is not ready to do that. This is called evanko also anupada paritassana hoti. The person is agitated. The person is agitated due to the fact that the person has to be detached from it, right? When that person understands, oh, it is going away from me, it is changing, it is becoming otherwise, it's not ready to understand it, so then the paritassana, agitation, is the result. But what did Buddha praise? Being agitated or not being agitated? Okay, so katancha also anupadana aparitassana hoti. Okay, when the person understands that the person has to be detached from these conditioned things, the person is not agitated. And Buddha explains how that happens. It happens only to a noble disciple, not to an ordinary person. It happens only to a noble disciple. Arya Savako, Suttava Arya Savako, a noble disciple who is well versed in the Dhamma, who has a thorough understanding, knowledge about the Dhamma, teachings of the Buddha, and Aryanang Dassavi. He has seen the noble ones, he has associated with them, he has listened to the teachings of the Buddha, and he or she has followed the path, is skilled in the path, teachings of the Buddha. And so this is the person. And what does he do? He does not regard form as self. Na rupang attato samanupasati. He does not regard this physical body as self, or self as having form, form in self, or self in form. Why? Because Buddha has taught him the Dhamma. There is no self here, there is no I here, there is no mind here. There is only four great elements here, and they are subject to change, right? They are viparinamati. They will become otherwise, right? They will become otherwise. This body gets sick, it gets old, this body will die, and anyata hoti. It's completely impermanent, subject to change. This is the understanding that leads to this abandonment of this notion of self. As a result, when that form decays and perishes, so the noble disciples form, this body also changes, right? It becomes otherwise. Consciousness does not latch onto the perishing form because it's replaced by the vipassana knowledge, the knowledge of the true nature. Tassa rupa viparinama anyata bhava nacha rupa viparinama anuparivartati vijnana hoti. Now the consciousness cannot, the mind is not affected by that change. So the consciousness cannot change the direction to the negativity. As a result, Agitation does not occupy that person's mind. So that person does not become frightened, worried, concerned, or agitated due to the fact that the person has to practice detachment and let go. That's the reason why that person is not agitated. He's ready to let go of it. He's ready to practice detachment. You understand? Because the person understands the true nature of the form. Okay, so then the feeling, he does not regard feeling as self, or self as having feeling, or feeling in self, or self in feeling, because Buddha has taught this person and this person has practiced it well. What is that? The feeling is always born of contact. When contact changes, feeling changes. Contact is the union of three things, right? So union of the internal sense faculty, external object, and the consciousness. So these three things are conditioned and impermanent things. So how can an impermanent contact generate a lasting feeling? It's impossible. Changing contact always produces a changing feeling. So the feeling changes. When the feeling changes, this person understands because he is mindful of the true nature of conditioned things. So his consciousness does not latch onto the changing feeling. Same with perception. This noble disciple understands with the help of the teachings of the Buddha. Perception arises with the arising of contact. When contact changes, perception changes. Sanya. And sankhara also changes when the contact changes. The consciousness also changes when the mentality and mentality in Amarupa changes. As a result, the consciousness does not latch onto the changing consciousness, because a new thing called vipassana knowledge is strong here. So chetaso paryadana chevuttasava hoti. So these negative qualities don't occupy that person's mind. The person does not become frightened, worried, concerned, or agitated due to the fact that person has to practice detachment here. Okay, so evanko also anupada aparitasana hoti. Arhat Kachana Thero explained, this is how the person is not agitated due to the fact that the person has to be detached from all conditioned things. Isn't that beautiful? So, who is going to read the last part of the sutta? And then if you have questions, we can discuss after.
The Buddha gave this brief passage for recitation, then entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. A mendicant should examine in any such a way that their consciousness is neither scattered and diffused externally nor stuck internally, and they are not anxious because of grasping. When this is the case, and they are no longer
that should be read as they are not agitated
because of
detachment.
Detachment. Okay. When this is the case and they are no longer agitated, there is for them no coming to be of the origin of suffering, of rebirth, old age, and death in the future. And this is how I understand the detailed meaning of this passage for recitation. If you wish, you may go to the Buddha and ask him about this. You should remember it in line with the Buddha's answer. Yes, Reverend, said those mendicants, approving and agreeing with what Mahakachana said. Then they rose from their seats and went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and told him what had happened, saying, Mahakachana clearly explained the meaning to us in this manner, with these words and phrases. Mahakachana is astute mendicant. He has great wisdom. If you came to me and asked this question, I would answer it in exactly the same way as Mahakachana. That is what it means, and that's how you should remember it. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the mendicants were happy with what the Buddha said. Sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu. Pandito bhikkhave mahakachano. Supreme Buddha says, yeah, the Arahant Mahakachana Thero has great wisdom, is so wise. Mahapanyo bhikkhave mahakachana. He has great wisdom. Buddha praises, right? So, and that is the way to answer it. So from this discourse, we learned a lot, didn't we? So what are the positive things? So like, what are the things that we need to cultivate? We learned two sides, positive side and the negative side. The side that we need to avoid and the side that we need to cultivate. So what are the things we need to cultivate? Yeah, the consciousness, our consciousness should not scatter and diffused externally, right? And it should not stuck internally, right? And then we should not be agitated because of detachment, right? Because of the necessity of letting go. We should not become agitated. So those are the things that we need to cultivate. Aren't we very fortunate to learn this?
Very much so.
The deep truth of this life. Like it's like Buddha went into the depth of this life, right? Buddha realized all the subtle aspects of this life. And the other thing is like thousands and thousands of disciples of the Buddha, like human beings like us, attained all these stages. And they made their consciousness like not scattered, not diffused externally, right? It's not stuck internally. And they practice this non-agitation with detachment, and they achieved all these qualities, all these noble things. They achieved it and they became liberated. These are not just texts. That's why we call that Buddha lives in these teachings. And these words created these enlightened beings, liberated beings. These words created, not hundreds, not thousands. And how many heavenly beings attain this so far? Because the Buddha is the teacher of gods and humans, right? Yeah, at least we are lucky to have this opportunity to learn the path to enlightenment, the path to Nibbana, so that we understand that things are conditioned, things are subject to change, things become otherwise, and whether it is inferior or superior, like whether inferior means the things that in the ordinary world, like food, drinks, clothing, money, vehicles, properties, those are inferior things. Not only the inferior things, but also these advanced things, the superior things, like the spiritual joy and rapture born of jhanas. Even those things are subject to change and condition and not advisable to hold on to. So if we are not supposed to hold on to those, even to those advanced kind of feelings, let alone these inferior feelings. That's the message, right? That's the powerful message.
Bante, the sutta is very, very clear with your explanation. The three are about consciousness, And Bhante, you may mention that as long as the consciousness is able to have these three, not to be scattered externally, not to be stuck internally, and have and not to have agitated mind, then this mendicant and this person can attain nibbana, right, Bhante? Now my question, Bhante, is if I am going to base on dependent origination, consciousness, there are two more levels on top of consciousness, right? Ignorance. Ignorance is a condition for volition. Volition serves as a condition for consciousness. So, Bhante, consciousness, there are two more levels on top of consciousness. I mean, the ignorance still there. So how can we explain this? How can we break everything on the dependent on origination, breaking that ignorance?
Yeah, the breaking the ignorance happens by understanding the Four Noble Truths as they really are. So ignorance should be abandoned with the arising, with the attainment of true knowledge, Vijja. Vijja is the solution for ignorance. Vijja means the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. When that knowledge of the Four Noble Truths gained, the ignorance is abandoned. As a result, it's called the cessation of ignorance, okay? Cessation of Vijja. Okay, with the cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of formations, sankhara. With the cessation of sankhara comes the cessation of vijnana, right? Consciousness. Consciousness stops showing the magic. Remember the simile for the consciousness given by the Buddha is like a magician. It's not showing the truth. Illusion. So that illusional work is stopped. The consciousness cannot show any illusions to enlightened people. Why? They understand impermanent things as impermanent, right? And painful things as painful, and things that devoid a self as things devoiding a self. So they see things clearly. So as a result, with the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of nama rupa, and then it goes on like that, then all the way to the cessation of karma. Karma is not formulated. With the cessation of karma comes the cessation of rebirth, right? Bhava nirodha, jati nirodho. So that is why they are not going to be reborn. And that is the end of suffering, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so the ignorance is abandoned when the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths happen. Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
So, Bhante, with the aggregates, they don't arise in somebody who's enlightened. They don't arise at all.
At that point, when the person is enlightened, a different thing arises. Different thing arises means in the ordinary lives or any person before the enlightenment, those five things that arise are called pancha upadana khandha. Okay, five aggregates of clinging. Okay, because the person has taints and clinging towards form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness, right? So what happens when a person attains enlightenment is that, the five aggregates is the result of this dependent origination mechanism, right?
That's right, yes.
So this cause and effect mechanism always leads to the fabrication of new five aggregates of clinging, right?
Right.
That is how this life continues. So in the life of enlightened beings, when this cause and effect mechanism is ceased, these five aggregates of clinging are no longer arising. So their life, these five aggregates of clinging are now without roots, and there is a different name for that. So that is called, not anymore, it is called Pancha Upadana Kanda. Now they are called Pancha Kanda. The word Upadana is removed because there is no more clinging to the physical form, the feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. So there's no more clinging. The taints, the sasava upadaniya, the taints and the clinging for those 5 things are abandoned now. And now only these 5 groups of clinging just function till the end of the life arrives, like till the Arahant being's lifespan is over. These 5 things will just function without giving rise to new clinging aggregates.
So is that when equanimity would arise?
Equanimity is always in their life now.
Okay.
As a knowledge, not as a feeling, but as a knowledge.
That nothing's permanent. That everything's impermanent.
Yeah, that's the result of having that knowledge fully.
Okay. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, good.
Okay, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
In Uddesavibhaṅgasutta, a good place to break things between contact with humans?
Yes, we can say like that, because Buddha teaches starting from, for example, if we take about the arranging of Patisampada in terms of 6 sense bases within the seeing process, hearing process, Buddha explains the arising happens like this. Chakkoncha paticca rupecha uppajjati chakku viññāna. Based on eye and the visual object arises the consciousness. Tinna sangati phasso. The union of these 3 things is eye contact. Phassa paccaya vedana. Dependent on contact, feeling arises. Vedana paccaya tanha. Dependent on feeling, craving arises. And then tanha paccaya upadana. Dependent on craving, clinging arises. Upadana paccaya bhava. Dependent on clinging, arranging of karma arises. Bhava paccaya jati. Dependent on arranging of karma, rebirth arises. Dependent on rebirth, aging, sickness, death, and suffering arise, right? So that is the arising. So when Buddha explains about the cessation in terms of seeing, hearing, smelling, and so on, Buddha teaches the same thing up to the feeling. But from feeling, it's different. So Buddha teaches chakkuncha paticca rupecha uppajjati chakku viññāna. Dependent on eye and visual object, consciousness arises. Union of the 3 is eye contact. Dependent on eye contact, feeling arises. And ya tanhaya asesa viraga nirodha upadana nirodho. If there is any craving arises based on the feeling, which is completely abandoned in the cessation part of the dependent origination. So that is why feeling should be contemplated. When feeling arises, if somebody can contemplate the impermanence, the conditioned nature of these feelings, that's a great thing to stop the links. Okay.